Hello, I am Dr. Mahima Nair. Today I am going to talk about the module Children with Disabilities. It comes under the subject of criminology and under the paper of juvenile justice. Now, in this module, I will first look at the various models of disability and then move on to who are these children with disabilities and what are the different kinds of children who have disabilities. We will look at some of the prevalence rates, we will look at the impact of families who have children with disabilities, and then we will look at the kind of scenario which is there in terms of interventions for children with disabilities. The introduction of this is that disability is defined in different ways, and the concept of children with disabilities include children with various kinds and levels of disabilities. The needs and requirements of children differ. This module will first define disability and explain the concept of children with disabilities. It does not focus on individual disabilities, but focuses on issues that occur across disabilities. As per the World Health Organization, disability is an umbrella term covering impairments, activity limitations and participation restrictions. Impairment is a problem in body function, it is a problem of structure, and activity limitation is difficulty encountered by an individual in executing a task or action, while a participation restriction is a problem experienced by an individual in involvement in life situations. The Convention on Rights of Persons with Disabilities states disability results from the interaction between persons with impairments and attitudinal and environmental barriers that hinder their full and effective participation in society on an equal basis with others. Disability has been understood through different models. Two prominent models include the medical model and the social model. The biomedical model considers pathology, impairment or dysfunction to cause disability. The medical model places the source of the problem within a single person and concludes that solutions are found by focusing on the individual. Medical model assumes that the first step solution is to find a cure. This ideology is problematic as disabled people are not necessarily sick or cannot be improved by remedial treatment. Policymakers are limited to a range of options based upon a program of rehabilitation, which includes vocational training for employment, income maintenance, as well as programs related to provision of aids and equipment. This functional limitation model, which is the medical model, has dominated the formulation of disability policy for years. Under the social model, disability is caused by the society in which we live, and it is not the fault of an individual disabled person or inevitable. This it is not an inevitable consequence of their limitations. Disability is the product of the physical, organizational and attitudinal barriers present within society which lead to discrimination. The removal of discrimination requires a change of approach and thinking in the way in which society is organized. Now, the social model's categorization of impairment and disability highlighted the fact that bodily impairments or deficits are compounded by disadvantage or restriction of activity caused by the contemporary social organizations, which takes no or little account of people who have physical impairments and who exclude them from the mainstream of social activities. The social model recognizes that disability is not the outcome of bodily pathology, but is socially produced by systematic patterns of exclusion that are built into the social fabric. This was given by Shakespeare in 1994. Also, this has been cited from Nandini Ghosh's article. The social model now questions the assumption of medical model that attributes the physiological body as the proximate cause of disability and the ultimate cause of handicap, and this tries to understand the processes whereby disability is created within oppressive societal structures. Now, when we look at the next definition, which was given by International Classification of Functioning, Disability and Health, this is the children and youth version. This regards disability as neither purely biological nor social. Instead, it looks at disability as the interaction between health conditions and environment and personal factors. Disability can occur at 3 levels according to this definition: an impairment in body function or structure, such as there is a cataract which prevents the passage of light and sensing of form, shape and size of visual stimuli, or it is a limitation in activity, such as the inability to read or move around. The third part is a restriction in participation, such as exclusion from school. So, these are the 3 parameters in which disability is defined. Now, some children are born with a disabling health condition or impairment, while others may experience disability as a result of illness, injury, poor nutrition. Children with disabilities include those with health conditions such as cerebral palsy, spina bifida, muscular dystrophy, traumatic spinal cord injury, Down syndrome, and children with hearing, visual, physical, communication and intellectual disabilities. Some children have a single disability, whereas others experience multiple disabilities. For example, a child with cerebral palsy may have mobility, communication and intellectual impairments. The complex interaction between a health condition or impairment and environmental and personal factors means that each child's experience of disability is different. Now, we will look at the next section, which looks at the prevalence of disability. Globally, about 200 million children do not reach their developmental potential in the first 5 years because of various reasons, which include poverty, poor health, nutrition and lack of early stimulation. The World Health Organization estimates that 15 to 20% of children worldwide have disabilities, 85% of which are in developing countries. As per the 2011 census of India, there are 7,86,921 children with disability below 19 years. This would include around 1 lakh children with visual impairment, around 1 lakh with hearing impairment, 6 lakhs with speech disorders and movement disorders, more than around 6 lakhs again with intellectual disabilities and multiple disabilities, around 1 lakh with other kinds of disabilities. Most information on prevalence of childhood disabilities emerges from the small scale studies. In a statewide Anganwadi based systematic sample survey in partnership with IAP Kerala, 2.5 to 3.4% of children had various forms of developmental problems as diagnosed by using screening tools. The most common forms were developmental delay around 69.3%, speech delay 14.3%, global delay 5.7%, gross motor delay 5.3% and hearing impairment 3.6%. The prevalence rate of autism spectrum disorder is estimated to be 1 in 500 and the incident rate is approximately 1 in 91,000 people in India. These are some of the studies conducted by different people. Now, recently another set of studies conducted by International Clinical Epidemiology Network conducted different studies to estimate the prevalence of neurodevelopmental disorders, which this was conducted among children aged between 2 to 9 years among urban, rural, hilly areas, tribal communities in India. Data from around 4,000 families from 6 regions of India revealed that 10 to 18% of children aged between 2 to 9 years from rural, urban, hilly areas had one or more NDD. The prevalence in tribals was lesser, around 5%, perhaps reflecting lower infant and child survival. The data related to disability is not always exact. Now, the Registrar General of India stated that Indian data on disability was unreliable due to a number of factors, which included few well-trained field investigators and issues of social stigma as well. Underreporting due to stigma and a range of other socio-cultural variables has also been noted by the World Bank. Now, we see that stigma influences a lot of this, and many of these studies have showed that it makes a difference. Now, current survey methods are also unable to minimize or account for these factors. There is a difference in measurements, as the recent Rights of Persons with Disability Act from 2016, there has been a change in the manner in which disabilities are defined. This would then change the numbers that came up in 2011 census. The prevalence of disabilities amongst children is quite high and is important to understand the rights of children as well. Because we have so many children with disabilities, we need to know their rights. Now, the next section deals with rights of children with disabilities. The Convention for Rights of Persons with Disabilities makes specific reference to children with disabilities in 2 of its articles. Article 2 outlines the principle of non-discrimination and includes disability as grounds for protection from discrimination. Article 23 highlights the special efforts state parties must make in order to realize these rights. Now, the Convention for Rights of Children also highlight children with disabilities. They say that children with disabilities are entitled to active participation in all aspects of family and community life. They require equal opportunities in order to fulfill their rights, and they should be treated with dignity at all times. Furthermore, they state that children with disabilities are best cared for and nurtured within their own family environment. The CRC also states that children should never be institutionalized solely on the grounds of disability. Now, the state parties must protect children with disabilities from discrimination and provide access to a range of services and supports which are specifically designed to help them achieve their full potential. This means that the states have to ensure prevention of disabilities as well as a rehabilitation plan for children. Children with disabilities as well as their families require this kind of a rehabilitation plan. Now, the recent Rights of Persons with Disability Act increased the number of disabilities from 7 to 21. With respect to children, one of the important provisions that came about is the inclusion of speech and language disability and specific learning disability, which have been added for the first time. For children to grow up into independent adults and citizens, one of the most important is the right to education. Now, the right to education along with Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan ensures that all children have the right to free and compulsory education till the age of 14 years. The SSA also ensures that every child with special needs, irrespective of the kind category and degree of disability is provided meaningful and quality education. Hence, SSA has adopted a zero rejection policy. This means that no child having special needs should be deprived of the right to education and has to be taught in an environment which is best suited to his or her learning needs. Now, the concept of inclusive education has become very important in the Right to Education and Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan. It was felt that inclusive education from the very beginning would enable disabled children to gain confidence and also ensure that they are a part of a larger society. Inclusion is more than placement. It must give young children with disabilities a sense of belonging and membership. It must give access to positive social relationships as well as development and learning of inclusion, access, that is a wide range of typical environment, and the use of universal design to support full access, along with participation, which includes methods that support and promote children for full participation, such as embedded instructional approaches, and supports infrastructure to support staff, such as the appropriate professional development. Now, this also includes specialized services in the setting. For the concept of inclusion to be successful, provisions and support need to be present at different stages of the life cycle. Now, the RPWD 2016 also states that every child with a benchmark disability between the age group of 6 and 18 years shall have the right to free education. For this to happen, it is necessary to ensure an inclusive environment from the beginning. Now, for further information on the RPWD, you need to look at the links that have been provided in the text. It is important for you to go through the entire act because it explains how disability has been perceived. We cannot go over the entire act at this point of time or in this module, but you need to access those links. One of the existing schemes that seeks to ensure inclusive education for disabled children is the centrally sponsored scheme of inclusive education for disabled at secondary stage. This has been implemented since 2009 in place of the CSS of integrated education for disabled children. Now, the objective of this IEDSS scheme is to enable the disabled children who have completed 8 years of elementary education to continue their education at the secondary stage, that is from class 9 to 12th, in an inclusive environment which is provided in regular schools. Now, apart from looking into the issues of discrimination and education, the CRC also states that children are best cared for within their families, and therefore, there is a need to provide support to the families. This would enable the families to take adequate care. In India, the main caregivers of children with disabilities are the immediate family members. Therefore, it is important to understand the kind of impact of having a child with disability in the family. When we look at the impact of families, we need to see that what kind of a child with disability has been born. Although there are many similarities in the way parents react to the birth of a disabled child, there are many factors that mitigate a wide range of parental responses. This is because each family which has a child with disability is unique in its specific members, structure, social and cultural backgrounds, and life experiences. Factors which affect child development include poverty, stigma, discrimination, poor caregiver interaction, institutionalization, violence, abuse and neglect, and limited access to programs and services, all of which can have a significant effect on their survival and development. Now, Farber had listed out successive adaptations in families when they have a child with severe intellectual disabilities or mental retardation, which is what it was called at that time. The first phase was the labeling phase, where the family looked at existing role arrangements and finds that major understanding related to family relationships may have to be renegotiated. The next phase is the normalization phase. In this, the family makes a pretense of maintaining its normal set of roles, and family members need to be considerate of each other for role lapses in an attempt to keep family life as normal as possible. The family tries to present a face of normality to the outside world and seeks to maintain liaisons with the world's normal families. The next phase is the mobilization phase. Here, the family members intensify the time and effort given to family demands, without, however, giving up their claim to normality as a family. After this phase comes the revisionist phase, where the family begins to make itself isolated from the community involvements and can no longer maintain an identity of normality. It revises the age and sex standards in organization of family roles. This revision represents an attempt to maintain cohesiveness in uncaring and lack of understanding world. The next is the polarization phase. Here, the family, finding itself unable to maintain coherence in a complacent or perhaps hostile world, turns attention inwards to seek the sources of this complacence or hostility within the family itself. Now comes the elimination phase. Here, the polarization eventuates in arrangements to preclude contact with the offending person himself. In this phase, the family seeks to renegotiate to regain those roles regarded as normal. Now that we have looked at these phases, we also need to see that families require support at different levels. They need different kinds of support in each of these phases, and there is a need to plan intervention according to the phase that the family is in. It is also important to note that parents of child with a disability may have both positive and negative responses towards their child. Some of the studies have reported that parents tend to view themselves more negatively and express more negative feelings towards their young children with developmental disabilities soon after birth. Now, their negative feelings could include hopelessness, anger, rejection, which center on the child's appearance or lack of ability. However, Westburn also found that parents can have positive feelings, including their feelings towards the child as good-natured, easygoing. Other positive reactions include more volunteer activity related to the child. They have a better understanding of individual differences and being more tolerant towards others. The next section will look at the prevention of childhood disability. Now, many of the causes of disability are preventable by providing the expecting mothers with better prenatal and postnatal care as well as proper nutrition for infants and mothers. Some of the main causes of disability in children are related to communicable diseases, infections in early childhood, early motherhood in girls, nutritional deficiencies amongst mother and post-birth children are not given sufficient food, insufficient or inaccessible healthcare services, there is inadequate sanitation and also inter-family marriages. Now, children's optimal development can be ensured during the early years by reducing or completely avoiding perinatal, genetic, metabolic and environmental risk factors. This can be done through early childhood intervention, which is the ECI programs. These programs are designed to support young children who are at risk of developmental delay or young children who have been identified as having developmental delays or disabilities. Now, the ECI includes different kinds of services like strengthening family competencies, promoting social inclusion of families as well as children. Such services include medical, rehabilitation, such as therapy and assistive devices, family focused support, for example, training and counseling of family members, social and psychological assistance and support to access mainstream services, which include preschool and child care. Now, services can be delivered through a variety of settings, which include healthcare clinics, hospitals, early intervention centers, rehabilitation centers, community centers, homes and schools. This was looked at by the WHO in 2012. A comprehensive approach is required for appropriate care and support. This involves early identification, assessment, early intervention, planning, provision of services and monitoring and evaluation. In working with disabilities, a life cycle approach to programming provides a helpful framework to identify the priority and sustainable interventions during the early childhood stage. This is also important to ensure a continuum of quality care, health services, protection and education as a child transitions from birth into adulthood through the first grades of primary school. Now, the next intervention which is important is the community based rehabilitation, which is CBR, which is also one of the major approaches to addressing the needs of children with disabilities in the low and middle income countries. This approach empowers children and their families by bringing together communities as well as government and non-government health, educational, vocational, social and other services. Now, community based approaches need to become an integral part of national health and education systems, policies and services. One of the examples of an ECI in India is the National Program for Screening, Diagnosis and Treatment of NDDs, which is the Rashtriya Bal Swasthya Karyakram. This was launched in 2013. It focuses on district level intervention centers. Now, as a comprehensive child health care implies assurance of extensive health services for all the children from birth to 18 years of age. The RBSK addresses diseases and deficiencies in addition to defects and disability. This kind of early intervention will lead to improvement of survival, reduction of malnutrition, enhancement of cognitive development, educational attainment and overall improvement of quality of life of children in general. Now, there are many issues of protection related to children with disabilities. Children in vulnerable situations have an increased risk of disability. Children who are trafficked, abused and sexually exploited are at risk for psychological effects as well as physical retardation. Other forms of violence against children can also lead to a disability, violence such as corporal punishment in schools, children living on the streets and purposefully created disabilities for begging. Now, the POCSO, which we have discussed in detail in another module, also states that sexual assault is considered aggravated under certain circumstances, as when the abused child is mentally ill or when the abuse is committed by a person in a position of trust or authority vis-a-vis the child, like a family member, police officer, teacher or a doctor. Now, this section is especially important for children with disabilities, as they have often as they are often dependent on their caregivers for their basic needs. Now, for further details on POCSO and other acts related, you have to go through the links which have been provided in the text. The site on the National Commission for Protection of Child Rights also will give you certain information about protection of children with disabilities. It is important to go through these links, as they will give you further information about the kind of things that are happening. We have come to the end of this module on children with disabilities. Now, this module began with looking at different definitions of disabilities and then attempting to look at the various models that exist to explain disability, the medical and the social model. These are important because the way disability is perceived will have an impact on the kind of services that will be provided to children with disabilities. How we view disability also has an impact on the kind of acts and laws we are able to get in the country to support children with disabilities. Because of an understanding and this development through the social model, which states that it is not just about the impairment, but it is also about the entire social system which does not provide opportunities to people. The Rights for Persons with Disabilities Act, which has been introduced in 2012, talks about a lot of opportunities and services that need to be provided for people with disabilities. In this, children with disabilities also have different sections. Now, in this module, we have looked at the prevalence rates in our country, the kind of issues that families face when they have to look up after children with disabilities, because the primary caregiver in our country is not the state, it is the family and the community. We have also looked at community based rehabilitation practices and some of the rights of children with disabilities in CRPD as well as the Convention of Rights for Children. It is important to understand that children with disabilities are children first. So, all the rights that are available to children as such are available to children with disabilities. In addition to that, they need some extra help because of their special needs. This module was an overview and has only looked at the larger issues that face all children with disabilities. There are different kinds of issues which happen to children and families with different kinds of disabilities. For all this, you need to go back to the text, read the complete text as well as the additional readings. It would be helpful to do a further search on any specific disability that you are interested in, because the module only gives you a generic overview of children with disabilities. Thank you.